Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you this morning. Thanks for being here as we join for Bible study. We have a special guest this morning. Wayne Seaton is here this morning. He has come all the way from Africa to join us in worship this morning. Now, you all probably heard about the big global computer outage, and it affected airlines and everything else, and it stalled Wayne's departure. He's scheduled to leave tomorrow now, but just a lot of frustration, tremendous amount of frustration. So we're glad he's safe, but we wish he had made his trip and was already at work. All right, so we're continuing our studies here on Sunday morning. We completed a first set of lessons called Rules to Live By. And so what our plan now is to do a second study, same author, more rules to live by, we're calling it. And so we're just talking about some biblical principles that actually really do have application in daily life. The one this morning, if you're looking at your study guide, if you don't worry. If you don't have one, don't worry, you'll be able to follow along. But the lesson this morning is spare the rod, spoil the child. I thought that was interesting that our author named the lesson that and then proceeded to say that actually is not a biblical statement. The concept is true to the Bible, but he mentions a 17th century author who coined the phrase, a fellow by the name of Samuel Butler coined the phrase. I think it is true to biblical concept, but it's not a phrase found in the scripture, spare the rod, spoil the child. All right, let's look at where it probably comes from, very closely stated in Proverbs 13:24. Proverbs 13:24 says, "He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes." Or the word betimes, Old English word, means frequently. So one of the things I think we want to point out is that a statement like this in the Proverbs is not necessarily exclusively talking about spanking a child or whipping a child or using a switch on a child. I think it would include that, but I think the statement is more generally, more broadly talking about discipline. Discipline in general. There are a lot of forms of discipline. Corporal punishment or spanking is one form of discipline, and I think the Bible upholds it as a tool to use in the disciplinary process. But I think this statement here in Proverbs is really intended in the general sense of discipline. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth or disciplineth him frequently or constantly. And so, again, the lesson is not exclusively or even primarily about corporal punishment or spanking, although I do think that it's a biblical concept and is certainly a tool that parents can and should use as they exercise judgment in disciplining their children. We'll talk more about the application of that a little bit more in the lesson as we go on. But I think this is talking about discipline in general, that if you don't discipline your child, then you hate your child. Now that's kind of funny, isn't it? Because human reasoning would be, I just love him too much to discipline him. I'm just going to let him have his way. I'm going to let him do what he wants to do because I love him so much. And this proverb is saying that is actually the opposite of reality. Reality is, if you love him, you will discipline him. If you don't love him, you're not showing proper love. And the reason why, I think, is because you're not acting in a child's best interest. You let a child go on his own, you let a child go without effective discipline, then you're not acting in his best interest. And so I think that's the sense in which you hate your child. If you love your children, you want what's best for them, right? What's best for them is that they receive appropriate and ongoing discipline. So there's a lot to the whole question of child discipline. but and we see a lot of failures, don't we? And all of us who are parents think that we have failed, and there's it's easy to fail in the business of child discipline, and there's a lot of judgment to be exercised in it. One of the things that I think it's interesting. What's a newer? I forget what new. Somebody read Proverbs 13:24 out of a newer version. Who's got a newer version? I'm reading.
King James says, "He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly."
Promptly, okay, disciplines him promptly.
Diligently,
New American Standard says diligently. Have you ever? I know you all have been around parents who, you do that again, I'm going to spank you. You do that again, I'm going to spank you. I told you if you do that again, the kid just keeps doing it, and the parent just keeps threatening and never follows through. That would be absolutely the contrary of this. Or a kid does something, and the parent spanks him this time, and the next time he lets him get away with it. And the next time he spanks him, the next time he lets him, 2 or 3 times he doesn't get disciplined at all. So, consistent, frequently, diligently, in a timely manner, all of those go into the business of child discipline. The author actually asked the question, why should discipline be prompt? Gordon says the New King James says, what's promptly? Promptly. Why? So when we discipline our children, why should we discipline them promptly when they need discipline? Why is that important?
I know, when my kid was small, babies, toddlers, you have to watch them. They stick a fork into an eyelid or something. And it's for their safety a lot of times, to smack them or something or other to teach them not to do it.
Okay, so again, it's in their best interest.
Something hot or something like that,
So it's in their best interest, and sometimes there's an immediate danger if you don't discipline them. Okay, Wayne?
it's even taught in our judicial system, justice delayed is justice denied.
Yeah. I think that's the key there, really, is that if we're not prompt with our discipline, then children need to connect the problem with the discipline. In other words, if they act out, but it's a long time before we ever administer any discipline, they have a problem connecting the discipline with what they did to deserve the discipline. And so promptness is so that they associate the punishment with the action that caused the punishment. JD?
That's exactly what I was going to say, but the illustration I was going to say is, at least from the time I can remember as a kid, you know how many times I had to touch something hot before I didn't ever do that again? Once. Because you did it once and there was a very immediate, you need the ramifications. So the same thing with discipline. The ramifications come pretty swiftly after the action.
And I think you're exactly right. And that's why, the parent says, you do that again, I'm going to spank you. You do that again, I'm going to spank you. And never follows through with the discipline. Then the child is not connecting behavior with punishment, behavior with discipline. And so it's ineffective. Tom?
Discipline also, there's a concept of correction. Sometimes we have what we call preventative maintenance when it comes to working on our cars and things around the house and stuff. We know something's going wrong, but we know if we take care of it soon enough, it's not going to lead to a major problem. And so the concept of discipline is sort of catch it early and correct it so it doesn't turn into a bigger problem.
I think that's the concept there. Yeah, I think so.
And we see it in everyday practices, but a lot of times when it comes to raising children, we sort of ignore that or put it off. We say, oh, we'll let them learn on their own. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just want to push how far they can go.
Yeah.
And a parent that doesn't set any standards or things.
You got to set limits, right?
Yeah. And usually, sometimes you set the limits before they even do something, and they learn that concept early on. And then a lot of times you don't have to tell them about something later on. They start equating those limits to things in life.
Don't you think, and you all have been around undisciplined kids are unhappy. and their parents are unhappy. I mean, discipline is for their well-being, but I think it's also for the sanity of the parent. You know, appropriate discipline makes a child behave, and that's good for them and good for the family. To this point about connecting the misbehavior with the discipline, Ecclesiastes 8 verse 11 says, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. This goes to what Wayne was saying. You know, what we think one of the big failures of our judicial system is they commit a crime, and it might be 3 years from now before there's ever a trial even for the crime that's been committed. There's certainly no speedy justice. So it's bad in terms of our government and the judicial system of our government. But in application to parenting, the same principle is true. When sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, the hearts of the Son of Men is fully set in them to do evil. That's a truism, and it applies to children as well. I thought I saw another hand here. Somebody? Okay. All right. Question 3 says, preventive discipline can make corrective discipline more powerful and less frequent. And I think this goes to the point that Tom was making. He asks us to consider Ephesians 6 verse 4, which is a passage we know well. Ephesians 6 verse 4 says, "Ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." You know, this parenting business is not easy. And here, this passage also suggests, you can do something in such a way that you just frustrate your children. You can, you're not supposed to provoke your children to wrath. You're not supposed to act in such a way that it frustrates them. Ineffective discipline is frustrating to the child. So I think this verse talks about it as well. But you're supposed to bring them up. This talks about a constant nurturing process. It's not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in a year. So what do we got our children? We've got our children for 18 years, maybe 20 years. That process needs to run clear through that. And it's going to change as the child matures. It's going to change. You're certainly not going to treat a 15-year-old teenager like you do a 2-year-old toddler. And so the disciplining process changes over those years, but it's a constant process. And parents have I think a really awesome responsibility in regards to training and teaching and disciplining. Discipline is one part of the process, right? It's not the whole process. I think it'd be a mistake to say, well, parenting is all about discipline. No, parenting is partly about discipline, but it's a whole lot about training too, right? And so there's a lot involved. This lesson is focusing on the discipline part of parenting, but that's not all there is to parenting. And I think that expression there in Ephesians 6 verse 4, train up a child, is important. Let's dwell on that a little bit more. Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning verse 6. Moses told the children of Israel, he said, "These words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the post of thy house and upon thy gates." So notice the important necessity of parents teaching the law of God to their children. And I've always thought verse 7 is interesting. Teach them diligently. Talk about them when you're sitting in your house, when you're walking by the way, when thou liest down, when thou risest up. You get the idea that this was a every day, frequently throughout the day, We're talking about the law of God. We're teaching our children about the law of God. We're writing them. You write them on the post of thy house. We don't do that, but we might stick a magnet on the refrigerator, right? We might use a sticky note on the bathroom mirror. Those kind of things wherein we're constantly involved with our children and the Word of God. Really important, super important. Tom?
Doing things growing up, sort of, identify this with something, teaching responsibility actions. I remember him going out, leasing a piece of property and planting, 1 or 2 acre garden that we had to go through and take care of. You didn't get to go out and play until you got those chores done. A lot of parents don't assign things to their kids. I remember growing up, being there in New Jersey, living in a development, big family would have, their kids would even take their garbage out to the road. They thought that was beneath them. My kids mowed their lawns and did everything wrong. And then they wondered, well, why are you trouble and yours not?
Yeah, so teaching responsibility is part of the parenting process too. Look at Proverbs 22:16. You know this verse well. Proverbs 22:16, or excuse me, 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. A couple of things about that familiar verse. One thing really key is that it suggests a window of opportunity. As parents, we have a window of opportunity. Train up a child in the way he should go when he is old, so he will not depart from it. So there is this window of opportunity. If we miss that window of opportunity as parents, then we're not acting in the best interests of our children, but we're missing that window of opportunity that may therefore cost that child his soul ultimately. You've heard of Dr. James Dobson, and he's done a lot of writing about early childhood and parenting. Some good, not all good. But one of the things he says is that by age 6, a lot of what a child is going to be is established by that point in time. And so he talks a lot about the importance of early childhood training. The idea, I'm going to wait until my kids are old enough to make up their own mind about going to church, about learning Bible lessons and so forth. I'm going to wait and let them decide when they get old enough to decide on their own. Well, you've already missed it, right? So it talks about a window of opportunity for training our children. The other thing about this is that, remember, it's a proverb. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. That's generally a true statement. But that's the nature of Proverbs, right? Proverbs are generally true, usually true. Overall, it's true, but it's not a guarantee. Proverbs are, there can be exceptions to a statement in the Proverbs. So, unfortunately, this verse has been used to beat up parents sometimes, So here's some parents, and when their child got older, he left the faith, maybe took a dive off the deep end, just not faithful at all. Maybe he got involved in some really bad stuff. Well, it's the parents' fault. I'm telling you right now, it's the parents' fault. If the parents had done their job, this kid wouldn't have turned out that way. That's not necessarily true. It's a proverb, right? It's a generally true statement. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. He might. You're giving him a lot better chance of being faithful if you train him up. But he's still a free moral agent. He can still do what he wants when he gets old, Wayne.
Misunderstanding this could lead to a doctrine very similar to Calvinistic position. Once you say it's never be lost.
Yeah.
Train up your child. Will never depart from it.
Yeah.
Once say no, he says.
Yeah. And so
Principle.
Exactly. You know what? I've actually got a verse, another proverb written in my margin right here. So Proverbs 22:6, and it said, you got to remember, it's a proverb, generally true, not exclusively true. I've written in there Proverbs 18:22. Proverbs 18:22 says, whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing and obtaineth favor of the Lord. Well, that's generally true. But have you known some guys who married a wife who was bad, really horrible? He married the wrong woman. She made his life miserable. Well, usually it's a good thing for a man to find a wife. But it's not always true. We've known just disastrous situations in marriages. So remember the nature of Proverbs, right? Again, I do think Proverbs 22:6 really speaks to the importance of using the opportunity we have while we have it as parents to train up our children. But remember, when they grow up, they're going to make their own choices. They're going to be free moral agents. Hopefully our training of them will lead them to make good decisions, but it will be ultimately their decision. A couple examples. Timothy, 2 Timothy 1. 2 Timothy 1. As we've studied our New Testaments, we think Timothy was an exceptional person, young evangelist, worked closely with the Apostle Paul. Paul called him his own son in the faith. Paul obviously had a deep love and affection for Timothy. How did a young man like Timothy turn out to be that guy? 2 Timothy 1, verse 3. I thank God whom I serve from my forefathers and with a pure conscience, that without ceasing I have remembrance of thee in my prayers night and day, greatly desiring to see thee, being mindful of thy tears, that I might be filled with joy. When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy mother Lois and in thy mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded in thee also. So, Paul gave credit to Timothy's mother and grandmother for the young man that he turned out to be. Go to chapter 3, verse 15. 2 Timothy 3:15. From a child thou hast known the holy scriptures, which are able to make thee wise unto salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. Timothy, that training of Timothy was from a child. The author makes a note. If you go back to Acts 16, we were studying this Wednesday night, it appears that Timothy's father was not a Christian. And so here's a case of a mother and grandmother working without the assistance of a father to bring up a child in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and they succeeded. It can be done. I just want to reiterate what I said earlier. Parenting is not an easy job. It's not an easy assignment at all. It's a very important one. It's one that deserves a lot of prayer, but you got to put the time in too. You got to be engaged and put forth the effort if you're going to bring up your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Tom?
Prodigal son. I had two sons. They both grew up in the same household. And one, got up to the age of 11, and he went out and did all kinds of things that were totally against anything that he was brought up with. But when he got down to his lowest point, he remembered the lessons he was taught later on, and he wanted to go back and be in his father's house. And if we instill that young, even, sometimes they depart from it, there's always that hope that they'll come through and realize the things that's really good for them and where they should be and what they should be doing. And so there's always that concept of teaching it young to where when they do bottom out, that they'll look to, returning to something.
I think that's right. We got to do our job. They're going to make when they become of age. They're going to make decisions. But we've got to do our job, plant that seed. Look at Proverbs 19:18. Proverbs 19:18. Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. This goes right along with what we've been saying, that this window of opportunity. Do your job while you have the chance to do it, because you get the idea that window closes, that hope diminishes with age. As they get older, hope diminishes, that if you've not trained and taught, and if they've not done right, the hope that they will gets less and less with time. So again, this is a verse that really stresses to us to use that window of opportunity that is available to us. Thoughts, comments, anybody? All right, let's look at another well-known verse here. The Proverbs, the Proverbs have lots of statements about child discipline, don't they? A really good lesson is just child rearing as taught in the book of Proverbs. Boy, it's powerful. 22:15, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. Kids are going to misbehave, right? Because they don't know better. You got to be careful. You know, the Calvinist teaches that, we are born depraved, and so they say it's a sign of the depraved human nature when a child misbehaves. That's not what this verse is teaching, and that's contrary to what the Scriptures teach. That is not true. But it is saying that children are immature. They don't know better. And so that being the case, they will act out. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. The rod of correction. Again, I'm going to say that I don't think this is talking exclusively about spanking or corporal punishment, but it would be included. So I hope you take away from what I'm saying here this morning. My position is that these statements in the Proverbs are not exclusively talking about spanking a child, although that's included. And I think it's an important tool in the child disciplining case. And I think anybody who says that it's wrong to spank a child is denying inspiration. Inspiration says you can and should use that tool. But I think these statements in the Proverbs should be accepted in the general sense of discipline. So I think when it talks about the rod of correction driving it far from him, I think that's talking about the general child disciplinary spectrum, which would include spanking them or switching them. But I think it's a lot more than that, right? That's not... I think anybody would be making a tremendous mistake to say the only kind of child disciplinary is spanking. No, that's not all there is. There's lots of there's a whole spectrum of disciplinary measures to take. And I believe that these statements in the Proverbs intend that. So I hope you understand my position on that. Although I do think that spanking is a tool, a necessary tool in the disciplinary process. Anybody? All right, so again, understand that the verse is saying there's immaturity. I think we would probably say a child is immature. A child will make foolish mistakes because they don't know better. They have to be taught better. So it includes instruction, but it also includes discipline when they make bad choices. Rita? Yeah.
So that word is a broad term that includes the training and the bringing the child up, in addition to the correction. Because the disciples, they gave examples. They taught, or followed, and then they also, rebuked. So I just want to make a comment about the word itself. I'm hearing it.
I think you're saying it's from the same root. Discipline and disciple are from exactly the same root. So what is a disciple? A disciple is a learner and follower. So what does discipline do? Well, it teaches and leads guides. So definitely, you're definitely right. Those have the same root, and there's a lot of parallel concepts there. Let's look at Proverbs 23:13. Proverbs 23:13. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. First point is the last phrase, deliver his soul from hell. Discipline him. Discipline is important for their eternal well-being, right? That if you don't discipline them, then the opposite may be true, that their soul will be delivered to hell. So discipline is necessary for their eternal spiritual well-being. I think that's important. Now, what about these verses? And I want to hear your thoughts on this. This sounds pretty harsh, right? This actually sounds abusive almost. The King James rendering, at least, beat him with the rod. He won't die. Beat him. Beat him with the rod, and you'll deliver his soul from hell. So, let's say that I don't like the Bible. I'm an anti-Bible person, and here's one of the reasons why. Because the Bible teaches child abuse. And all you Christian people who put so much confidence in the Bible, your book teaches and authorizes and actually instructs us to be abusive to our children. That's why I disregard the Bible. How are you going to answer that? Huh?
Sometimes, you go through, you look at it. You have to take harsher actions on the things that are the most detrimental. They steal a cookie, but they steal something else, rob from somebody else. It's a different thing. I mean, the cookie, you might take a slap on the head. Go out and you steal your neighbor's, something from your neighbor, you might have to take them out behind the woodshed. You're teaching different things. We look at God's examples. Garden of Eden, he starts out, he tells them, you can eat everything but this. If you do, you're surely going to die. Well, they heard something else. They did something else. God punished them. Cain and Abel, same thing. Go through the children. Go out, collect manna on, that, but don't pick up any sticks on the Sabbath day. Guy got caught picking up sticks. What happened to him? God took care of Achan when they're coming into the land of Canaan. Same thing. He told them, don't take the spoils. He made examples of things that are serious situations. And sometimes I think that's what the writer is doing. Or sometimes they need stronger discipline to correct an issue. Okay,
so here's what I'm hearing in your observations. Discipline needs to be case specific, right? And as you say, more serious issues deserve more serious consequences. I think that's true. Wayne?
The first part of verse 13 is the overriding principle. Don't hold back discipline.
Yeah.
Even if you have to provide corporal punishment. Our kids, when we beat them, they would scream like they were dying. Especially my middle son. And I had one that stuffed a pillow or stuffed socks in his pants because he knew he was going to get spanked.
Yeah.
But they acted like it's not going to kill him. You can't withhold discipline because either the children or somebody else. If you ever spanked a child at home, to see the looks that
You might get arrested these days.
That's right. So, but what that teaches a child is he can act up in public places.
Yeah. Just like we've been saying throughout, there's a fine line here. And I'll tell you, I confess to you, Joel can attest to this, I think I crossed the line sometimes. I think sometimes when I spanked, I was spanking. They always say, don't spank when you're mad. Usually you're mad when you spank. And I think I crossed the line. I think I spanked excessively or too much, too hard. It's a fine line. And this certainly deserves a lot of prayer and help. J.D.?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to that question of, what people say and what our response to it is. If our whole world is full of rules that you have to follow, our everyday life, like you drive on the road, you do anything, you'll get in trouble with the government. And you should. But, you got to successfully hold down a job. Your company has rules, your boss has rules. Everybody has rules. So if you never teach your kid how to understand rules or follow rules, I mean, it just goes back to you're completely throwing your kid out into the world, completely unprepared to even live life.
Yeah, I think you're right. So part of life is learning to submit to authority. And the first authority that we learn is the authority of mom and dad. And so you're disciplining them, but you're teaching them a necessary life principle. You submit to those who have authority over you. And then that, as J.D. said, that's going to go all the way through life. It's a necessary thing for sure. I see another hand. Wayne.
One of the quick points, verse 14, the last part of verse 14. The whole purpose of discipline is, and mine has the word shield, deliver his soul from death. You're saving his life. Beating with a rod is not anything like being killed as a result of the lack of discipline that a child received or didn't receive in the family.
Yeah.
The family unit provides the majority of discipline, and then that carries on through life. If it doesn't, if he doesn't learn that principle, he's going to have a hard time with the authorities who are going to eventually have to kill him.
Maybe take his life, exactly. I think, I have to acknowledge that in our present world, and with all the political correctness we deal with, the statements beat him with the rod. People are going to, I think we understand that is not just, that if we use that to justify child abuse, physically harming a child, beat him with a rod, bloody him up, that would go contrary to so much else that the scriptures teach, right? About loving our children. And so it has, if you just took that as a standalone verse, I think a lot of people are going to be put off by that. In our world, for sure. A lot of people are going to be put off by that. We have to understand it in the much broader context of the entire Bible, which tells us to love our children and the responsibilities we have toward them. Let's hurry on to another place here. Let's look at Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29:15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. Verse 17, correct thy son, he shall give thee rest, yea, he shall give delight unto thy soul. So we're going to do a couple things when we exercise proper, appropriate child discipline. We're going to train them, very important. But it's also going to be a blessing to us in the long run too, right? How many parents have just agonized over the problems that their older children have gotten into? No rest. They have no rest. They're just constantly in turmoil. Their family is just constantly torn up. Correct thy son, he shall give thee rest. Yea, he shall give delight unto thy soul. It's good for them in the long run, certainly. And it's good for us in the long run, certainly. So if you're a normal, emotionally balanced person, you do not enjoy administering discipline. Would that be a fair statement? If your brain works right, you don't like having to exercise discipline. But you do it because it's necessary. And in the long run, it benefits the child and you for doing it. If you enjoy child discipline, I want you, if you enjoy spanking your child, I think you need help. But you do it because it's necessary. Tom?
If you look at the justice system a lot of times, if you sort of equate that, you know, if you have a child, you know, and you have to put them in discipline or correction. It also bothers us when we see the justice system being too hard on somebody for something that, you know, is a minor infraction. And I think when we go back to the Proverbs, start looking at that, that's the balance that we're sort of looking at. You know, if you beat a child to senseless for, you know, stealing a cookie, you know, we understand that that's child abuse.
Yeah.
But you correct him for that situation, you don't have to, you know, watch him go to the electric chair for murdering somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think, real quick, we're just out of time. Colossians 3:21, and this is the point. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. The New American Standard Version there says, lest they be exasperated. You know, if your discipline is not done right, not done correctly, too much sometimes, not enough another, not done promptly, not done in a timely fashion. If you're a bad disciplinarian, your child will get discouraged or exasperated because he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. You're given all kind of mixed signals, right? And so be prompt, be consistent, be appropriate so that your child doesn't get discouraged or exasperated. JD?
Just to, make one comment, kind of in our context, living in, a republic we do where we have a lot of freedom and a lot of ability to, redress the government. Something I feel like, unlike in some other places that you have to teach people, is just use a fanciful example. If there's a speed limit out there on some road that's 40 miles an hour, and I think it's crazy because it's the straightest road.
You could go 55 here easy.
Right. Now, in our system of government, I have every right, if that speed limit is set by the city council or the county government, to go in front of those governments, write them letters and say, this speed limit ought to be 55. But until I and, getting a bunch of people together convince the government to change it to 55, I better go 40. And that's the same thing I think, in our society, we have to teach, kids and people better growing up that it's fine to disagree with something and to go through the legal channels of trying to change something you disagree with, but you better follow it until it's changed.
I think you're right. Exactly right. All right, I'm going to tell you, this lesson today talks about a tough job, I think. And I'm thinking it gets harder as time rolls on and not easier because our society is pushing in the opposite direction, right? And so it gets harder. It's a hard job and deserves a lot of prayer. We admire our parents. Thanks for the work you do. Never give up. Thanks, everybody.